Hello.
Our story begins inside the illustrious Jedi Temple. The Clone Wars had just kicked off and Anakin Skywalker was coming back from his first mission of the war. It was a success, but there were some things he needed to work on. All this would come in due time. His new captain, unit, admiral, and pilots would have to get used to each other. Best thing about Anakin was the fact that he was a quick learner. He was requested to meet with Master Yoda upon his arrival. As a newlywed, this brought terror to his mind. He assumed he was found out about, and he'd have to be removed from the Jedi Order, but that wasn't what happened. Anakin walked into Master Yoda's room, and the Grand Master was smiling. He spoke in little riddles as he always did. Yoda told young Skywalker that teaching was a great gift. A Jedi trait, but one shared between all sentients. To learn and to teach is natural. There is always much to teach and much to learn. He turned back and looked out the window, asking Anakin where did he see himself on this spectrum. Anakin was caught off guard by the sudden question, but he told Master Yoda that he was finished with his learning. No? Yoda laughed a little and told Anakin that one is never too old to learn, not even himself. He continued, telling Skywalker that at the end of his padawan journey he was. With it being complete, one might take on the responsibilities of a Jedi Master. While a knight he would remain, he could instruct and perhaps find himself in Mace's position. Anakin was confused. But Yoda was alluding to the fact that Mace was young when he reached knighthood, like Anakin, and he was young when he became a master. Mace joined the High Council at 24 or so years old, and Anakin could be on that very same trajectory. Obviously, this wasn't directly said, more so just layered into the conversation's subtext. Yoda asked Anakin if he believed he'd make a fine teacher. Anakin stuttered, and Yoda laughed again, smiling as he turned and looked up at the boy he watched over for the last 10 years. Skywalker's eyes were always fixated on the horizon, never here in this moment. Anakin wanted to become a master at one point or another, Obi-Wan said so himself, but he never really figured out how or when that would come. Again, always looking to the horizon. Yoda tapped his cane on the ground and asked Anakin if he would instruct if given the chance to do so. Anakin was pretty adamant that he wasn't sure if he was ready, and Yoda told him that one never is ready when their fate calls upon them. Skywalker sat down and leaned over, placing his elbows on his knees, feeling the crease in his new glove and the metallic hand that sat underneath it. He asked Yoda what he was getting at. Yoda looked away and then back to Anakin, telling him that there was a boy, similar to him, that was ready to become a padawan. Anakin listened in as Yoda explained everything. The boy, Ezra Bridger, had a very high ceiling, one like Anakin. His beginning was very similar. However, Ezra was a little more balanced with the Jedi Code. This didn't mean that the boy's personality was any different. It was partially why Yoda wanted Skywalker to train Ezra. Like Anakin, Ezra had a difficult upbringing. A little younger than Skywalker when he joined the Order, and just a little outside the range of a typical Jedi when they would be allowed into said order. Ezra was 5. But the Tipli and Templar sisters who found him insisted that he be allowed to join. They were strong believers of the Jedi Code and trusted by the Council, which is why Ezra was allowed in with very little issue. Ezra was found out in an Outer Rim territory planet by the sisters when they were investigating some sort of rebellion. It was a resistance movement against a corrupt politician. Ezra's parents were killed in their resistance, leaving Ezra to be orphaned at the age of 5. This obviously was a big reason for why the Council had their reservations about him, but the boy showed promise. He seemed to be well suited for the life of a Jedi. The Tipli and Templar sisters also promised to keep a close eye on him, which they did, so it all worked out for Ezra. His personality remained the same, but he was a bit of a rebel. Due to the age difference between Anakin and Ezra, they missed each other in classes, but at only 5 years apart, they shared a lot of the same personality traits. In a way, this would be Anakin's karma for how he was with Obi-Wan. Ezra was young, excitable, not so much cocky, but stubborn, something the sisters often tried to coax out of him, with very little success, of course. Anakin wasn't told about how stubborn Ezra could be, just more so the fact that Ezra had a very boisterous personality. Anakin was still skeptical, but he was willing to see it out. And by willing to see it out, that meant he had no intention of training Ezra. He just wanted to try and ease Yoda's mind. The two of them would oversee Ezra's training with the rest of his class. They were using their Boken sabers to train. The instructor marched around them, calling out instructions and allowing the students to follow them. He would specifically tell certain students to do which move and so forth. Anakin watched on, remembering these days and getting an ick from a couple memories of his time as a student. It was always so much better to be Obi-Wan's student. He was more fun to torture as it was. Yoda looked up and pointed out Ezra, who hadn't noticed Anakin or the Grand Master overseeing their little training regiment. The Bridger boy was doing everything as one normally would, but his facial expression showed that of someone not like the rest of the group. The other students were fixated on their task, moving their lightsabers about steadily. Ezra was moving his blade proficiently, but every time the instructor looked away, he started making faces at him. Yoda took a deep breath and looked up to Anakin, who grinned while crossing his arms. He then lowered himself to Yoda's level and whispered, asking if he really wanted that kid to team up with him. Yoda looked over and almost wished he hadn't suggested this. Anakin was getting a little too excited at the prospect of training Ezra already. Skywalker's eyes looked up and Ezra's face was stiffened and emotionless until the teacher looked away again. Anakin told Yoda that he wanted to spar with the kid before making his decision. Yoda made a confused face but agreed with it. Hours later, Ezra would walk into a training room on the outskirts of the temple. Anakin was looking at Padme's residence when the young Jedi walked in. Anakin turned back and welcomed Ezra. He smiled and bowed respectively, before asking what this was about. Anakin turned back and grabbed his lightsaber from his belt and told Ezra that he was testing him. He saw his instruction earlier today, and believed he showed promise. Ezra wondered if Anakin saw the faces, which Skywalker did not comment on, as he ignited his lightsaber. Ezra did the same, and they bowed to each other once more, before moving around in a circle. Anakin was much taller than Ezra, so he watched the young Jedi size him up and get a feel for how he'd approach this duel. Ezra stutter-stepped, and it caught Anakin off guard. Typically, a young Jedi wouldn't be bold enough to do that, and Ezra made a face, similar to the one he made during his lessons. In an ironic way, because he was so used to making exaggerated faces during his strikes and moves, it became almost like muscle memory, so his stutter step came with a mocking face that Skywalker didn't appreciate, but also found rather funny. Their blades clashed for the first time, and Ezra got a feel for what he was dealing with. As an experienced Jedi youngling, he knew what to expect from certain builds, but he could tell that Anakin wasn't going to go easy on him. The two of them moved around before fully getting into an engagement. Ezra wasn't sure why he was sparring with Anakin, but he wasn't going to win this, so he decided that this was likely some sort of test, and he thought of the best way to impress a teacher. It wasn't accepted, and it was kind of forbidden, but Ezra, due to having survived on his own a little before the sisters found him, had to learn things on his own. One of those things was mechanics of some sort, so as Ezra was getting dominated by the 19-year-old Chosen One, he ignited a little electrical circuit on his lightsaber, which sent out a burst of energy into Anakin's metallic hand. This wasn't a visible shocker or stunner, simply one Ezra built into the hilt and then hid with his non-dominant hand while dueling. This by no means hurt Anakin, but it turned his arm into static electricity, kinda like pins and needles, which forced him to drop his lightsaber. Ezra saw his move and swung forward, stopping his blade above Anakin's shoulder. Skywalker smiled as Ezra told him he was beat. Anakin shook his head and looked down, where Ezra saw Anakin's lightsaber in his other hand in a reverse grip facing towards Ezra's stomach. The young Jedi smiled and got a little pouty, but in a joking way as he stepped back. He deignited his lightsaber and scowled, which Anakin reciprocated. Ezra looked towards the door and then back to Anakin, wondering if Skywalker would say something. Anakin took a deep breath and then came to his conclusion. He didn't think he would do this. Ezra still had a lot more work to do, but it was a fact that Ezra was unorthodox with his moves. To Anakin, that was everything. He couldn't train a true Jedi. Someone that was like him would be so much more fitting for his training style. Ezra fit that mold in his mind, so as Ezra prepared to walk towards the door, Anakin asked what Ezra thought of being his student. The kid turned back and with the largest grin, nodded his head. Ezra kept the cool composure so he didn't come off as nervous, but he was super nervous. The fact that Anakin could have been watching his training session earlier definitely messed with his head too. Plus, to Ezra, this was the Chosen One. Of course he'd be excited about the prospect of training with him. The two of them would spend the rest of the day getting acquainted with each other. Skywalker had a couple questions about the whole lightsaber enhancement, which Ezra gladly showed him. The two of them had a much easier time getting along, simply because Anakin was in control over the situation. He always liked having a grip on everything, so for him, this was a huge moment. If it was orchestrated by Yoda and Obi-Wan to give him a student, he would have had issues. But by this route, it allowed Anakin to feel like he had control over the situation at hand. The simple bonding over Ezra's little modification was what really jump-started their bond as Master and Apprentice. Before they were shipped off to the next leg of combat, Anakin and Ezra upgraded the modification to his lightsaber, making it a little easier to use, giving it a little more power and getting a proper trigger for it. Master and Apprentice were then off to the front lines. Ezra wasn't sure about how he would handle the war. No one can really teach you for what will come. Sure, the clones have their training, and sure, the Jedi are taught to embrace those who transform into the living force. But this was different. The entire prospect of war seemed so distant, especially until the first battle. Thankfully, Ezra had Anakin, and they were both getting used to being in the war at the same time, as well as adapting to the troopers they were serving with. This allowed their bond to also tighten pretty well, because while Ezra was stubborn, he did take after instruction and orders as one should. The fact that Ezra knew when to joke around and when to not allowed Anakin the freedom to teach Ezra properly. There was, of course, mess-ups. All students have that during their training. Young Bridger was also very quickly introduced to Anakin's style of training. Since Ezra was still growing, it would be useful for him to use his size to his advantage, gather the acrobatic skills he could, while also prepare for the war that he'd be fighting in. This involved training in the Circle of Death, as Ezra called it. A bunch of clones lined up in a circle around their Jedi commander and then took shots at him. Initially, it really frustrated Ezra, but he eventually got the hang of it. Though something that was very prevalent within Anakin was also very present within his student, their natural pulls to the dark side. For Skywalker, it was much easier, but Ezra, like Anakin, wanted to help those around him, so his pull towards darker abilities was solely so he could protect his troopers that he served with. The war wasn't easy on either of them, but Ezra understood things as his master did. Not that it was something they liked, but they had to keep their spirits high. Joking with each other allowed them to stay high in mind and in spirit. Ezra was familiar with Kenobi and Cody, but for the most part he kept with the men of the 501st. Despite how close Anakin and Ezra were, Bridger would usually spend time alone. It wasn't that he had issues with anyone, but he found that through some of the most basic Jedi instructions, it was easier to handle the war. Meditations and spiritual meetings with himself gave him the willpower to persevere even after losses. There was a weird tug and pull. As a Jedi and as a sentient, he wanted to form strong connections with his troopers, but as a child in war, he wanted to pull away. Knowing that his best friend could die at any moment was unnerving. Sure, the same could be said about Anakin, but he already survived Geonosis and the duel with the legendary Count Dooku, so he likely wouldn't fall victim during combat. As preparation for Separatist duelists, Anakin taught Ezra how to fight against the likes of General Grievous, Asajj Ventress, and even Count Dooku. The Separatist war machine was prepared with enemies that were designed to kill Jedi. Nine Guards and Commando droids were a part of this lineup. Anakin was very adamant that Ezra needed to learn combat with these types of machines, so their spar sessions went on for elongated periods of time. Despite Anakin not hitting his ceiling of potential yet, there was a huge added benefit for Ezra. Anakin was operating at a very high level, and just being around that intensity allowed him to catch up and excel rapidly. This of course was aided by the slight use of the dark side that Ezra learned from Anakin and had naturally within himself. Their combined battles during the Clone Wars were always stressful, and Ezra had to keep pace with Anakin, who always operated at 110%. As the war drifted from the first year into the second year, Ezra found himself growing exceptionally into a Jedi. It surprised both Anakin and his student, because Ezra drifted around normal Padawan range for a little while, and then rapidly shot up. His force prowess was exceptional for someone his age, and his gifts allowed him to be useful in combat arenas with his master. This included a scenario where they were stuck with a carnivorous monster on a moon far from the core. It wasn't an Anakin lesson, more of a Jedi lesson sprouting from an encounter he and Anakin had. Though what was really noticeable about Ezra in the first year of combat was his change in saber combat. He naturally drifted into Form 4, which was very present within the lineage Ezra came from. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan used it really well before the Battle of Naboo. It wasn't until after that Kenobi switched to Form 3. This made teaching Ezra lightsaber combat really easy, but the boy was like a sponge. His engagement with General Grievous during the rescue mission for R2 really made Ezra realize how deadly the droid general was. Without Skywalker's training, he would have shared the same fate as many other Jedi had during the war. Grievous was not to be toyed with, and it was after that encounter that Ezra became obsessed with intertwining different aspects of different forms into his main one. He took tidbits of information from different holobooks and archived data, using a combination of forms 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Of course, these weren't mastered, but they were learned to an extent and incorporated within his fighting. Form 6 came from his acrobatic practice with the clones in the Circle of Death, and as Ezra got older, his lightsaber continued to be a staple of uniqueness about him. However, it was the bond between Master and Apprentice that put them on the radar of the Separatist leaders. War makes one serious, but those who can resist its torment, those like Anakin and Ezra, were truly unbreakable threats. Dooku couldn't touch Anakin, but Ezra was certainly someone he could have killed. But the boy was showing signs of a child prodigy, enough that he was on Palpatine's radar. Anakin, of course, was the main choice, but the fact that the Jedi so arrogantly put the Chosen One and a child prodigy together only proved their arrogance. Tragically for the Sith, this was not arrogant, it was brilliant. Thanks to a strong emotional foundation with his instructor, Ezra felt comfortable requesting to lead commando raids and missions with other elite members of the 501st. It was this trust that gave both Master and Apprentice confidence to trust each other when they were forced apart. On the battlefield, sure, they worked well, and Ezra did have his faults in commanding, but as every good master does, Anakin coached his student out of his head, making sure he understood that mistakes happen, and while they do cost lives, they cannot allow those to pull up their mind. If they stop to tear themselves down over a mistake, then it could become an even more costly one. With said growth came change for Ezra as well. When he reached the age of 16, 2 months into the second year of the war, he cut off his locks of hair and kept a more refined look. He also, while keeping the upgrade to his Jedi weapon, had a change in lightsaber color. His blade now held an emerald glow, a show of change within himself. However, his master had other plans for him. Due to the fact that Ezra had been operating on commando missions without his master and doing so well in the combat arena, Anakin believed Ezra was ready for his trials. Ezra was confident, not overconfident, but the fact that his master thought this highly of him concerned him in a way. For Ezra, he never doubted himself per se, but he didn't feel old enough, which was fair. He was only a few months removed from being 15, but his master believed he was ready. Ezra and Anakin had a conversation about it. Part of this was because Ezra didn't act like his age. Most Padawans and even younglings had a serious tone about themselves. But Ezra was a goober. There was one particular commando assignment when he and a couple clones ran an undercover mission in a Separatist city. Ezra was stopped by one of the brand new super tactical droids, and the droid asked for his identification. Ezra referred to himself as Jabba the Hutt, before cutting the droid down and following the objective till completion. Because of this incident, the Separatists were extremely wary of a 16-year-old Jabba the Hutt infiltrating their lines. Ezra got a good laugh out of Anakin because of this. Skywalker hated the Hutts, but seriously, who would have thought that one could confuse a droid like that? Regardless, Anakin had a little heart-to-heart with Ezra about everything. He told a student, the one he considered like a younger brother, that there was very little he could teach him. Ezra excelled in a way that Anakin could only compare to himself. He did so with a charming laugh, one that confidently said that this was a facetious statement. But in all reality, he didn't want to hold Ezra back. He was very impressive as a student, having held his own against Grievous at 15 years old, running commando raids and taking leadership with confidence. Anakin told Ezra that he didn't have to take the trials if he didn't want to, but he wanted to see his student succeed. In his own opinion, the boy learned everything that he could be taught from Anakin. There were plenty more experiences that they could have together, but if Ezra thought he was ready to pass the trials, then he was willing to support him in doing so. Ezra was a little unnerved, but he understood why his teacher was suggesting this. Anakin was the perfect teacher for Ezra. Not that anyone else would have been bad for him or held him back, but it was a fact that they were very similar in personality and unorthodox style. Anakin could keep Ezra along, but he felt it would hold him back from success. This was something Anakin and Obi-Wan spoke about, to which Kenobi told Anakin that he needed to trust his intuition. If he was guided by the Force to believe that Ezra was ready, then he should trust himself. Kenobi had to admit for himself that he believed Anakin was right in line for thinking this. It wasn't far-fetched to believe that Ezra would start training a student of his own after passing his trials either, which Kenobi was very confident that Ezra would have no issue in succeeding in as well. Master and Apprentice wouldn't be able to return to Coruscant for another month, and honestly, for Ezra, it was a show of things happen for a reason. Like, he was unsure about Anakin's feelings about the trials, but after a month of consideration and even training with Anakin, he realized that his master might be right. Not that there weren't things for Ezra to learn. For example, he wasn't a master of Form 4, but no one was at the age of 16. It was a fact that Ezra would learn so much more in the next step of his journey as a Jedi. These things would be difficult for Ezra to learn as a student, restricted to the life of a padawan and Jedi commander. Plus, Anakin had full confidence that Ezra would do fine handling himself, and even potentially a future pupil. In every way, Ezra was what Anakin should have been. A student that was accepted and trained by the Jedi and given to an exceptional instructor, one who could gift him knowledge on how to be a Jedi, in both the traditional sense, but in the changing time sense too, which was not a knock on Kenobi, just suggesting that Anakin would have done better with someone that understood him more. The Jedi instructors guided Ezra to excel during his adolescence, and Anakin embraced Ezra's quirky features and gave him room to excel as a student. It's why the boy was a child prodigy, most comparable to Masters Windu and Ro. Skywalker didn't envy his student for this, but in his own way, it was a look what I could do moment to the Council. A way to prove that even in his unorthodox nature, he was able to instruct a child prodigy to do what no other Jedi had done in the past 2 centuries. Ezra passed his trials with flying colors, as 3 of the Jedi in his lineage watched on: Yoda, Obi-Wan, and of course his master. Ezra's accomplishments came with the removal of his padawan braid, his ascension to the rank of Jedi Knight, and of course the promotion for Master Skywalker. It was an overall positive experience for the young Jedi Knight, and the celebration was one that was handled with maturity and of course jokes. Ezra was already quick on his feet, but with Obi-Wan around him and being taught by Skywalker, his wit was off the charts. One could only fear for the student Ezra decided to train. Though one benefit from this entire scenario for Skywalker, aside from his student becoming a knight so early on, was that he was a Jedi Master at 21 years old. It was a solid deal. To commemorate the next step of their journey as Jedi together, Anakin and Ezra sparred for a little inside the training room where it all started, and then the two of them snuck off to go watch pod racing at the local cantina. It was a great night for the two of them. They had their laughs, their cheers, and a couple bets for fun. No drinks for Ezra though. Okay, maybe a sip. The following day, Skywalker was shipped off to the front lines, and Ezra was left to his own devices. He could have gone back to the battlefront with his master, but he kinda wanted to follow the footsteps of another Jedi. After his knighting, Master Yoda referred to some other child prodigies over the years. Anakin, Mace, and Vernestra were all prodigies of their time. If Ezra wanted, he could do as they did, and train another. Yoda used Vernestra as the closest example because he and she were both 16 years old when they became knights, which was extremely rare. Ezra took a couple days to research Master Ro, and even speak to Mace while he was still on planet about his experience as a child prodigy. He obviously knew Anakin's story, but he wanted some other opinions on the matter before he jumped straight into having a student. After about 2 weeks, Ezra had himself a Togruta student named Sashla Prim. She was 13 and very excited to be under his tutelage. They were assigned to a former Jedi outpost in the Outer Rim. Olea was the planet chosen, and Ezra was given a small detachment of clones from Kamino to accompany him. This base was being given to him to operate because the Jedi were hoping to use it as a middle base between the CIS and the Republic. Since the Jedi hadn't been on Olea for a couple decades, the CIS wouldn't think to check it. Ezra's job was simply to report back on Separatist movements. Really simple. Though there was a little issue. Ezra was on Palpatine and Dooku's radar. In Palpatine's mind, Anakin was his first option, but Ezra was a solid backup. Both were fairly powerful Jedi, and they both had a pull to the darkness, so it was a no-brainer in Palpatine's mind to have Dooku send his agent of evil to test it out. Due to Asajj being displaced by Palpatine a couple days before, Dooku needed to send Grievous, which he wasn't pleased with. But essentially, if Grievous killed Ezra and his student, then Anakin would blame the Jedi. If Grievous only killed a student, then Ezra could be corrupted. To Dooku and Sidious, this seemed like the perfect way to test out Ezra's skills. If he could hold his own against Grievous, then he was a reasonable prospect. The only issue was whether or not the Sith could reasonably turn Skywalker and Bridger to the dark side. Perhaps Skywalker as the apprentice and Bridger as the leader of the Inquisitors. That might be something worth doing if they got there. Regardless, they allowed Bridger to get settled in his new home. He was given command over 50 or so troopers. It seemed like the perfect amount for him to maintain control over. The local population was indifferent for the few months the Jedi and clones were there. And then, the droids arrived. General Grievous came with a fleet, but only dropped himself and a bundle of battle droids. The clones took to the streets and defended the population. Ezra and Sashla took point, blocking blaster bolts back at the droids. The clones, assigned to Ezra, stood tall with their Jedi commander. They used the town to take up high and low positions, except commando droids were already here. So aside from the bundle of B1s, there were commandos and for some reason Magna Guards. Ezra told Sashla to take out the commandos and provide protection for the troopers on the rooftops. As he said this, 4 Magna Guards dropped down from the building he was next to. He looked to his clone sergeant and told him to hold the line. His lightsaber ignited quickly to block the strikes from these powerful droids. Their strikes were quick, and Ezra used every ounce of his master's training to avoid their strikes. Thanks to the training regiment of the Circle of Death, he was prepared for them as they encircled him. Ezra leapt over strikes, kicking one of the droids before cutting down another. He looked up to see his student doing alright, as he turned back to defend himself. The droids jabbed and leapt at him. Ezra slipped back, firing an electroblast from his lightsaber which stunned one of the droids temporarily, giving him a chance to counter another before cutting through its body and moving on to the other 2. The clones were starting to lose their position as Ezra quickly made work of one of the last 2. As he ripped through it, he heard the sergeant cry out in agony as he turned back to see General Grievous lifting the clone into the air as B1s fouled out past him, blasting the clones down. Ezra hesitated for a moment before being blasted in the chest by the Magna Guard next to him. Grievous laughed, calling Ezra by name and telling him that he would not escape this time. The young Jedi Knight leapt back, avoiding another strike from the Magna Guard, before he stepped forward and cut it down. He pointed his blade at Grievous as the other clones and his unit retreated back to the Jedi outpost to take cover. Sashla looked down. She was finishing with the commandos and she was waiting for Ezra's command, but he didn't want her to get involved in this. He understood what kind of monster Grievous was, and they hadn't gotten far enough into her training to have her prepared for this encounter. But Sashla was trying to live up to her lineage's potential. Grievous ignited 2 blades and swung at Ezra, who blocked and played the dueling game. He ducked and weaved, staying light on the balls of his feet. Grievous was heavy with his swings, and Ezra used as little energy as he could, knowing that with Grievous it had to be a game of patience to survive. His student, on the other hand, didn't know that, as she waited for the perfect opportunity and leapt down, igniting her lightsaber. Ezra swung forward and Grievous interlocked 2 blades against the young Jedi, as his other 2 hands separated and grabbed 2 more lightsabers. Ezra prepared to counter, but Grievous slipped back and swung at Sashla, who was completely blindsided by the counterattack. Ezra lunged forward, trying to help, but the droid general placed himself between Master and Apprentice, knowing that Ezra wouldn't be able to live with himself, as a Jedi, for failing his student. Grievous gave Ezra a chance, but there wasn't really ever a real shot at saving his student. The clones tried to assist, but they were being fully pushed back into the outpost itself. Sashla jabbed at Grievous, almost landing a hit, but he threw his clawed foot into her torso and clenched, before thrusting his lightsaber down and launching her body across the street. Ezra cried out before ducking another swing and getting kicked backwards by Grievous. He slammed into the ground and tumbled backwards. His eyes darted over to his student, who was very clearly dead. Rage started to build up within Ezra as he stood tall and moved forward, using the darkness instilled from his childhood and embraced by his master. He spat at Grievous and leapt up, spinning over himself and then launching the Force forward. Grievous's claws locked into the ground and he barely slid backwards in the dirt road. Their blades collided again, Ezra using his focus on Form 4, but it wasn't getting him anywhere, so he transferred around a little bit. He knew a lot, but didn't master any single form, so it was just basics from different lightsaber forms, aside from his greater knowledge in Form 4 and 1. He moved into the more acrobatic Form 6 before slipping out and dancing his way into Form 3. Grievous was getting frustrated, because no 16-year-old should be this difficult to deal with. As Grievous got an opening, he swung high, and Ezra blasted him multiple times with his electro weapon. It didn't stun Grievous, but the shock jarred him. Ezra was able to remove one of Grievous's hands before pulling Sasha's lightsaber into his hands and using it against Grievous, as he settled into Form 1. The droid general tried to combat Ezra's moves, but he was fueled with rage. It was throwing him off his game, but the young Jedi's strikes were precise. Grievous was able to counter these strikes, and as Ezra was getting settled into 2 lightsabers, his student's blade was ripped apart from his hands. He looked down as the crystal fell onto the ground. It was broken into 1,000,000 pieces. Ezra looked up, and from within, he felt a call to the darkness unlike ever before. He threw his hands forward with all of his might and channeled his inner demons, clenching Grievous's organs with both of his hands and pushing them together, trying to crush them. Grievous fell to his knee as he felt terrible pain from behind his armor, as Ezra jolted forward, striking with all of his anger. Grievous blocked the strikes coming his way as he stood up just in time. One of his last hands was cut off, and Ezra lost all memory from that point forward. When he regained cognitive function, he was holding Grievous's mask in his hand. Below him, he could see Grievous crushed by a lightsaber wound, one from his stomach to his chest, and Ezra then heard his clones calling for reinforcements, but finding their comms to be jammed. The Jedi commander ran over to them, helping them cut through the droid forces before preparing for their evacuation. The people of Olea had just been given an extra reason to resent the Jedi. Ezra felt so much shame. Despite Grievous being destroyed, whose body was also brought with them, the loss of his first student and his pull to the dark side was indescribable. Ezra knew he messed up, not just in his turn to darkness, but his failure to protect his outpost, and in his inability to save his student. When he returned to Coruscant, he gave a full report to the council, buried his student, and vanished into his room. The young Jedi was consumed with grief, and as a way to try and heal from the disappointment in himself, he took a brash vow. It was the only way he believed he could handle this loss. He felt solely responsible for something so far out of his control. He was targeted specifically by the Sith, and didn't even know it. Because Grievous was just a temporary leader, Sidious and Dooku took their notes of the droid general. The fact that Ezra was able to defeat him proved that either Grievous was worthless, or that he could very easily become a useful ally in the future. After he defeated Grievous, his troopers and himself vanished. They used a light corvette to abandon Olea and used the corvette to blockade Run, which helped them get to Coruscant without having to die in a fleet battle. Master Yoda was the first Jedi to approach Ezra. When he knocked on the young Jedi's door, there was silence, and so Yoda entered quietly, only to find Ezra in a brash vow. Yoda felt so sad. It wasn't like Ezra to go down this path. Of course, there was worry for him. He told them about everything that happened on Olea, so they were very well aware that he used the dark side to destroy General Grievous, but he felt as if he lost himself. Ezra was very remorseful about the entire thing, and told the council that it would never happen again. He left their chambers before they could even say anything in rebuttal to what he said. Yoda wanted to speak to Ezra about his darkness, but upon seeing the Barash vow taking place, Yoda knew that it would take a master of Ezra to break him from this disgust with himself. Anakin wasn't able to get back to Coruscant immediately, but when he did, he went straight for Ezra's room. He wanted to see Padme, but there were more pressing matters for him to attend to. Anakin, upon entry to Ezra's room, sat down across from his student and closed his eyes. He spoke to his former apprentice and told Ezra that it wasn't his fault. He needn't blame himself for an attack he couldn't have prepared for him. Anakin read everything he could from both Ezra's and the clones' reports from the battle. He was completely aware that Sasha was trying to help her instructor when General Grievous killed her, and Anakin knew that Ezra tried to tell her to go with the troopers. It was her rash decision that caused her downfall. There was only so much Ezra could do when she joined the fight. Ezra lowered to the ground and his eyes opened. He looked at his master with tears in his eyes and told Anakin that he pulled to the darkness. It wasn't just that he lost his apprentice, but he lost himself in the moment. Anakin sighed, remembering the blind rage he went to on Tatooine after his mother's death. He looked down. He wasn't in any place to scold his student, not that he would to begin with. As a Jedi, he was supposed to be better than what he was on Tatooine. He told Ezra that to make mistakes was to be sentient. They are not perfect beings, and he promised Ezra that Sasha wouldn't want him to be in this room mourning her loss. She would want her master to be finishing this war. The trip to the dark side was bad, but there were ways to control it. In an odd way, Ezra's self-torment over his usage of the dark side really made Anakin question if he had a grip on his darker attributes. Skywalker took blame for this too, so that his student wouldn't have to face it. He told Ezra that he should have been taught how to control those feelings. It was a failure Anakin admitted he had, but with time comes lessons. This was one that neither of them could have completed together, but now they could. If Ezra was willing to join him, they could conquer their demons and embrace a more Jedi-like way, one that fit in line with Qui-Gon Jinn and Quinlan Vos, a method that didn't make them bad, but let them empower themselves without so much darkness. A tear slipped from Ezra's eye as he told Anakin that he just wanted to be a good teacher and he failed. Anakin got a hold of his student and embraced him, telling him that it wasn't his failure. No one knew the CIS would send General Grievous to Olea. He couldn't take the full brunt of that blame. As a Jedi, it was his responsibility to do so. Whatever failure a student incurs, it falls onto the instructor, but this was not his burden to bear. Anakin called Ezra by name as he held his student and told him to be proud of himself. He stood on his own. He conquered insurmountable odds. He did what no Jedi Master could do and defeated General Grievous. The loss of Sashla was bad, and it would hurt, but Ezra had brought the war closer to a resolution. Sashla wouldn't want him here. She would want him finishing what they started. The two of them broke apart as Ezra nodded his head and looked at Anakin with a slight smile. Skywalker's hands were on both of Ezra's shoulders, as he told Ezra something that each Jedi in his lineage had said to their student, that Ezra was a much wiser Jedi than he was. There was a hitch in the road, but he would persevere, because that's what Bridger did. Ezra thanked his master as Anakin stepped forward and told his student to wipe those tears away. They had a long road ahead of them. To help his student, Anakin brought Ezra back to the 501st, including the other survivors from the skirmish on Olea. Those troopers were hardened warriors, and they did what it took to secure a temporary victory. Anakin wanted to return to Olea to pop Grievous's fleet, but it wasn't a good idea with Ezra around. But Kenobi was already on it. The system was close to him as it was, and with permission from the High Council, the Jedi were able to once again free Olea and send support to the surface. Anakin's fleet, on the other hand, stationed themselves outside of Buttigieg, on the Hydian Way. It was a system close to Dathomir in the Outer Rim. Skywalker and Bridger worked with each other on their starfighters and sparred and even had a Circle of Death rematch. This quality time between former teacher and pupil was so important for Ezra's healing journey. After about a week or so in the system, they received intel from a long-range scanner that the Separatists were attacking Dathomir. It turns out the witches crafted a Zabrak warrior to kill Count Dooku, and he took that a little too personally, so he sent his entire military to wipe out Mother Talzin and those vile creatures. Because the Republic fleet was stationed on a hyperspace route, they couldn't really leave it, but they needed to. It was the Jedi way to protect the innocent, even if they were witches. Anakin and Ezra were going to Dathomir to help. They split the fleet up, half of which consisting of elite ground troopers. Due to the CIS not anticipating a counterattack, they were caught flat-footed upon the Republic's arrival. Their entire fleet was facing towards the planet of Dathomir, and aside from raising their rear shields, there wasn't much they could do to stop this counter. Skywalker and Bridger took their starfighters and led their most aggressive counter-offensive during the war. Republic fighters buzzed through Separatist lines as gunships followed the two Jedi leaders past the fleet and to the surface of the planet. As they entered the atmosphere, Anakin and Ezra fired away at the droids on the surface, buzzing them with blaster fire before leaping out of their vessels and igniting their lightsabers. Their astromechs piloted away from the battle as the two Jedi slammed down on the surface, wiping out a number of battle droids. Behind them came the gunships, which dropped off troopers and also fired away, giving heavy support cover, especially by taking out the heavy tanks at the back of the Separatist lines. The battle was intense upon their arrival, but the witches could see that they had allies here to help. Mother Talzin and Old Daka could feel the presence of Jedi, which made them unhappy, but for the time being, they needed the alliance with the Jedi to save their coven. Dooku was moving about with the droid forces as they approached the mouth of the Dathomiri cave. Thanks to the arrival of the clones and the Jedi, they were able to stop the droid assault in its tracks. Anakin and Ezra caught right back up to where they were before Ezra became a knight, standing side by side and moving as one united force. They made their way through the brush, with Captain Rex keeping close behind them. As they made their way through the Separatist lines, they came across Count Dooku, who, like the two old witches, could sense their presence. Anakin and Ezra stopped. They looked at Dooku, and he ignited his lightsaber, calling Ezra a boy, and asking if he seriously was willing to lose another Jedi due to his arrogance to fight. Ezra closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His face scrunched up, but then it slowly loosened, and he fell back into harmony with himself. Dathomir was a dark planet, but Ezra wasn't willing to lose himself to achieve victory. Anakin smiled at his student, which Ezra didn't see, as they both turned towards Dooku and engaged. Their blades were speedy, and they filled the middle of the battlefield. Witches, clones, and droids fought around them, blasting through each other's ranks as the witches utilized the assistance of the clone army to make a strong counterattack. Dooku's blade was strong and precise. He cut at the Jedi, but Ezra and Anakin were the perfect duo for this. Dooku had no doubt in his mind that he could win this contest with a lightsaber duel. Skywalker and Bridger weren't even half of his age combined. This would be easy. His blade jabbed forward and they ducked and defended. Ezra used some of the more acrobatic skills his master taught him, which helped him keep Dooku at bay. The fight continued to intensify as Dooku picked apart each of their defenses. As a master must, Anakin kept taking the brunt of the assault, while Ezra did as his student should have, worked his way into the battle. Dooku was a madman with his strikes, but he noticed, as their fight prolonged, that his forces were losing momentum. This was partially because of the clone counterattack, but also because the Separatist fleet was destroyed. He was trapped on this planet whether he liked it or not. Dooku spun forward, not even knowing the details, clapping down on Ezra's blade before turning back and jabbing at Skywalker. Ezra regained his balance just in time to lose it again, as Dooku made sure that neither of his opponents could make an offensive against him. He was confident with each move he made, as he sent electricity at Ezra, who blocked it but barely handled the blast. He took a deep breath as he looked at Dooku, who smiled at Skywalker, telling him to enjoy his student while he still breathed. Anakin's brows creased, but he did not dive into anger. As he prepared to strike, the sound of metallic screeching could be heard, as Dooku turned his head back to block a strike from Mother Talzin, who used her weapons to drive an offensive against Dooku. He lost his balance as she swung both of her blades in an aggressive array of strength and power. Anakin smiled as he joined in, with Ezra following closely behind. She did not care for Jedi nor Sith, but she was here to erase Dooku's stench from the galaxy. He lost his balance, holding back what little he could as Mother Talzin pressed harder against him. She slammed her blades upwards, and he held his lightsaber above his head as Skywalker and Bridger jabbed forward, both of their blades penetrating Dooku's torso. As he looked down with shock, the Jedi stepped back as Mother Talzin dragged her weapons around and cut Tyrannus off his feet. Ezra and Anakin kept their distance as they looked at Mother Talzin with a little bit of worry. She put her weapons away, two swords created from Dathomir magic. She looked to the two Jedi as the clones ran past her, pushing the CIS battle droids into a full-on retreat. She told them to not worry. Her quarrel was not with them. However, she was willing to offer a proposition, considering the fact that she did not want the Republic taking control over her system. Anakin and Ezra looked to each other as they put their weapons away, and Mother Talzin gently waved her hand, gesturing that they follow her. Their cave wasn't destroyed. There were a couple dead sisters and battle droids, but they would have lost everything had it not been for the Republic. She brought them into her room and sat them down at a long table. Talzin told the two Jedi that she had been peaceful with the Jedi and Sith for centuries. In her mind, there was no reason to quarrel with either, and truthfully, she saw both of their desires to be superficial. However, this changed things. The Sith outright attacked her and tried to destroy her home and her people in an act of war. She told the two Jedi that she would assist in the destruction of the Sith Lord for a trade. If Skywalker and Bridger could represent the Republic and the Jedi Order in this meeting, then they were to promise that Dathomir would be left alone. Anakin and Ezra had no reason to want to control the planet. The witches didn't use the light, and they were definitely dark side users, but what benefit would the Jedi or the Republic have to take it over? They promised her that they would keep Dathomir from the Republic and Jedi occupation. She smiled and waved her hands over a green orb, and told them that they were honest with their intention. She expressed that she had interacted with the Sith Lord Sidious before. He was a cruel man, but they rivaled each other in power, which is why they left each other alone. She told them that before Skywalker was born, it was Yoda, Sidious, and herself as the most powerful entities in the galaxy, from her understanding. She had left the Jedi and Sith to themselves, but now she would make sure that Sidious died as well. Talzin knew she wouldn't outright kill Sidious, but he would have no issue coming here to Dathomir to kill her, especially if it was revealed that she and her witches resisted Dooku and slaughtered him. All she asked was that Yoda come here to join them in this. Everything was quickly and quietly arranged. Similar to how she had with Dooku, she sent witches to Sidious's residence and created a doll of him, using it to torture the Sith Lord and forcing him to come to Dathomir himself. Talzin and Sidious were very familiar in Force potential. The biggest difference was the fact that Sidious trained to use all of his abilities for evil, whereas Talzin used her abilities for witchcraft and personal use, not for inflicting pain on those away from her system. When Sidious arrived, he marched to their cave to fight the mother of the Night Sister clan and kill her. As he entered the mouth of the cave, his fate was sealed. He knew he couldn't win the Clone War with Talzin torturing him from a galaxy away. And as an added note, he understood that killing Mother Talzin was much more difficult than orbital bombarding her home. She had to be killed personally, which is why Sidious came here alone, in hopes that he could vanquish her and Old Daka in one swift strike. Of course, that did not happen. Master Yoda, Windu, and Skywalker surprised him and engaged the Dark Lord, while Ezra ran a bombing run on Palpatine's vessel, keeping him from escaping the planet. Not to mention, Talzin raised a Force-protected barrier around the cave, so the only people leaving were the ones she wanted to allow to leave. The fight between Jedi and Sith was barbaric in her eyes, just two children in a sandbox fighting over toys. They were pathetic in her mind, but the Jedi did what they came here to do, as she got what she wanted: security. The Sith were destroyed. The Jedi formed an alliance with the Night Sisters, seeing that maybe not all forms of usage of the dark side were bad. They might be witches, but it was just their individual understanding of the Force. The Jedi learned from this encounter to respect that. However, they had to return to their war. While the Separatist movement was strong without Grievous or Dooku, the CIS government didn't know that. The reserve forces were kept in Dooku's hard drive, because it was an emergency contingency plan. They were never meant to be known by anyone else or used by the CIS. The plan was always Order 66, and because the Sith were gone, there was no Order 66 and no reserve contingency. The CIS never went looking through Dooku's information because they needed a leader, not plans from a dead guy who was losing control on his war. Ezra's ability to learn about the darkness he held within allowed him to feel confident in moving forward and eventually taking on another student. He always kept Sashla's padawan braid in his room, to remember her by, but when Ezra became 17 during the early part of the third year of the war, he believed he was ready to become a Jedi instructor this time, so he picked another student. He was a bit hesitant about doing it this time, but he went forward with a Kifar student named Quavos Vac. This time, they wouldn't be stationed on a small outpost. Ezra would be given command of a small fleet, with a new up-and-coming captain in the Republic Navy. The Council realized their mistakes in placing him on Olea. They saw now that Ezra was in every way Anakin's student, and he belonged with a stronger task force, one that could make a strong difference in the galaxy. In the days following Sashla's death, Ezra's personality started to slowly come back. A year later, when he had his new student, Ezra was able to fully be his full fun and goofy self, while of course adopting the role of an instructor again. His lessons during the Clone Wars would prove to make him an effective teacher, so while the Jedi moved on past the revelation of who Palpatine was and his quote-unquote disappearance, Anakin Skywalker became a Jedi Council member. The war would eventually come to a close when Ezra was 19, making the war 4.5 years long. Its conclusion brought the people of the galaxy a sense of peace. Without the war ending, the people would have felt lost. With an interim chancellor during the years after Palpatine's disappearance and death, the Republic was able to move into the post-war era with very little struggle. Thankfully, the Jedi were also able to stop Maul's incursion of Mandalore. This mostly came from Ezra's fleet moving about in that area of the galaxy. Not near Mandalore per se, but in that sector. They caught the criminal empire by accident, and it resulted in Maul and Savage dying during a fleet battle, one that Ezra and Quavos had no clue they were responsible for. Ezra's student would become a knight at the age of 18, proving that Skywalker's lineage was one of accelerated growth. Of course, so much of this was due to the war, but it made Ezra one of the youngest masters in the Order, and due to the rapid change in the galaxy, Ezra would eventually find himself on that same council with his master. During all this time, he would meet a Jedi Knight named Ahsoka Tano. She was trained by Keller and back during the Clone Wars, and she didn't see much conflict, which was probably better for her in her mind. Ahsoka and Ezra got along fine, and they became good friends following the Clone War. The political environment, of course, was difficult to deal with, but with a strong leader, the Republic bounced back in strength. The Jedi and Night Sisters maintained a strong friendship, as the Jedi learned to accept that others perceived the Force differently from themselves, and that did not make them bad. This also included bringing in Night Sister Jedi, similar to how they did with the Barandos Sages on Doran. With the Sith gone and the Force restored to balance, the Jedi made a move to make peace with the galaxy that they had left behind in the years leading up to the Clone Wars. It would be with the young minds of the Council and former Master and Apprentice that did this. Anakin, Ezra, Quavos, and eventually his own student would be responsible for great change in the Outer Rim, one that would set people free from their oppressors, and a galaxy led by an internally reborn Jedi Order. And that, my friends, is our story. And special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavic Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Callie, Galaxy66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Photos Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with Three First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing, for supporting the channel. Smash that like button, support my lives. Check out the Patreon, cool things on there, updates for the Sith Clone Wars. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. With this story, I really wanted to highlight the idea of the child prodigy. And it's talked about in the story, and it might just be forgotten about by the time you get to this point, but I wanted this video to highlight what Anakin could have been. With the other Anakin-trained Jedi stories, it's kind of like they have a normal progression, similar to how Ahsoka had it. In this story, I wanted to change that up. I wanted Ezra to have this accelerated growth. He's extremely, really, full of a raw potential that's very rare. And so I think if you take that potential from the Rebels era and put it into the Clone Wars era, you only make it larger. And I think Ezra would grow really rapidly, not just because of the Clone Wars, but also being with Anakin. I think it's in that way that Ezra would become a child prodigy. And so I really wanted that to be the focus of this video, what Anakin could have been, but also what Anakin could be with a child prodigy as his student, and how that pairing would work perfectly, and how that pairing would also work perfectly in the minds of the Sith. But I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.